Story 1. Food packaging should be recyclable or compostable. Reusable packaging would be ideal if it could be managed. Milk used to be sold in reusable bottles. There are stores where fruits and vegetables are in piles, and you bag them yourself using a reusable bag that you bring. Other stores place 4 apples on a foam tray and wrap it in plastic wrap. Story 2. Pretty much any medical device would be excluded from that because the intention is to design something that works as effectively as possible. Also, rest in peace IKEA. Story 3. Anything petroleum-based, plastics and rubbers. Recycling plastics and rubbers right now is one of those technically it will decompose, just don't look at the fine print involving tens of thousands of years kinds of problems. Then just about any silicon chip and the fiberglass composite board it is on. All of the electronics are purpose-built for that single part, and desoldering, testing, and reusing any of that hardware would be a logistical and quality control nightmare. A lot of this problem also comes down to labor hours. I'll use cars as an example. A brand new car coming off the factory will cost $40,000. I know this number varies a lot, but if I were to take that car down the street and have the engine replaced, it would cost $10,000, a quarter of the original price. Products are designed to be assembled only. There is little to no regulation requiring products to be reparable, let alone easily reparable. And some products are just not reparable in any reasonable way. If you want to have a good idea of this, look at the California laws for labeling recyclable items. California has tightly regulated that word for product sales. Story 4. What does it mean to be recyclable if no one actually recycles it? I make fancy light-emitting diode hula hoops. The tubing wears out or breaks and gets replaced eventually. I periodically end up with a dumpster full of totally recyclable high-density polyethylene and polypropylene tubing. Even separated and cleaned, the recycling place does not want to process it. Believe me, I have tried. Story 5. Plastic is mostly used for special purposes and cannot be reused or recycled. Without plastics, there would be many more deaths and suffering due to the removal of essential products. Intravenous bags used to be made of glass jars. Intravenous tubes, syringes, portable heart monitors, computed tomography machines, magnetic resonance imaging machines, surgical devices, implants, prosthetics, laboratory equipment, and more all rely on plastic. Some plastics are technically recyclable. Story 6. I am diabetic. I have many consumable items for my insulin pump and my continuous glucose monitoring system. The combination of bodily fluids, complex electronics, and injection systems that thread copper wire and silicon tubing under my skin means 90% is not recyclable as it is medical waste. I can and do recycle the large amount of packaging. Medical equipment is a problem. When I was first diagnosed, I had to boil needles and everything was reusable. However, it was inaccurate, painful, and not effective therapy. The trade-off 50 years later is that my health is easier to maintain, but I produce a large amount of waste. Story 7. I think some things need to be stopped entirely, like little trinkets and toys that are sold only to be used for a day. Items like foam fingers and those 3-foot-tall beer cups that only hold about 1 can's worth. At the zoo, your child might get a drink for $8.99 in a cup that is mostly plastic decoration designed to make your child want the cup, which they will forget about once you leave. Story 8. Single-use medical or forensic plastics. I am not an expert, but I have seen enough videos on climate change to know that these two are almost always given a free pass due to the absolute necessity for sterility. Story 9. Medical supplies, particularly in emergency medicine. Prepackaged single-use items are essential in that industry. Story 10. Go back to making things meant to last a long time, like older washing machines and refrigerators. Not everything needs to be new and shiny. Story 11. The problem for most things is that there are always secondary and unintended effects. Greener packaging often means more spoilage and heavier transport. Efficient distribution networks save a lot of fuel to the point where many local goods lose any benefit from being local once you factor it in. One of the biggest contributors to environmental impact is fuel. Companies dislike spending money on fuel and have optimized their processes effectively. When it comes to consumer goods, companies do try to reduce waste because waste costs them money. There are exceptions, but people are generally poor at understanding trade-offs and impacts. The candy wrapper you dislike is insignificant compared to the oil used to deliver it to you. People focus on easy, trivial things that do not make a difference, but because they are visible, they attract attention. There are many examples, such as the controversy over plastic straws. Straws were never a major problem, and the proposed solutions improved some aspects slightly but caused bigger issues elsewhere. Environmental activism often addresses immediate problems but sometimes creates worse problems. People who point this out are often ignored because perfection is the enemy of good. Many responses reinforce this point. People fixate on edge cases and minor issues that have virtually no impact on the environment. Story 12. Dell laptop I bought for my daughter for college, $1,500 3 years ago, should have lasted through all 4 years. However, the cable from the motherboard to the monitor has failed. It turns on until you lift the screen to a viewable position, then it cuts out. It should be an easy fix, just replace a $5 cable. Nope, there is no way to open it up. It is pressed shut with chemical and pressure. The entire screen assembly must be replaced, and the part alone costs $500. Story 13. Massively applies to gift cards. Maybe I should make an unpopular opinions post, but I could go on for pages about how stupid gift cards are and how much I hate them. It functionally boils down to 3 things for me. Gift cards create a massive amount of plastic waste. However much plastic you think is being wasted by gift cards, the reality is probably 100 times more. They are not good gifts. They are not thoughtful presents, and cash would probably be better. I have rent due. If you are not going to pick out a specific gift you think I will like, do not give me $20 to spend at Dunkin'. Just give me $20. Gift card companies and retailers love gift cards because they usually result in people spending more than the gift card amount, so they do not waste a few cents left on the card. Alternatively, people do not use the gift card for various reasons, and the company just gets to keep that money. Anyway, I hate gift cards. They are the biggest waste of resources, time, effort, and money, while regularly producing massive amounts of profit for corporations. Story 14. Fun fact. If you are on the International Space Station, you wear clothes and then throw them away when they are dirty. Making washing clothing possible would require much more fuel and energy to get the water to orbit. Story 15. Concrete, once it is fractured, you do not really want to be messing around with it, but it is one of the main ingredients of our society. Story 16. Toilet paper, paper towels, paper plates, diapers, tampons, cotton swabs, and any other cotton or paper products could never be recycled or repurposed. Story 17. Recycling is a scam by large plastic manufacturers. Instead, we need precycling. Plastics, especially single-use and packaging materials, should be taxed unless they are made from recycled plastic. Story 18. Working on something related to this, the current government model is to set the standard at societally necessary. For example, the plastic wrapping on sterile surgical tools will never go away, but the clamshell packaging on consumer products should immediately be eliminated. Food packaging is one of those gray areas that has arguments on both sides and is inevitably one of the things people fight over. Story 19. Most medical plastics. We could have reusable glass syringes and serum bottles again. But catheters? Forget it. Story 20. We have to severely restrict production and importation of non-biodegradable plastic. It is getting into children's brains. 50 years from now, people will be aghast that we were so careless about this. Story 21. I feel like this should be the case for cars. Not even considering the dangers of large trucks, the average car has become much larger than it was in the 1990s. Story 22. Isn't the point of this statement that it applies to everything? There is nothing that cannot be redesigned or not produced. Story 23. Disposable clean or sterile gloves for medical care. They are already made using as little material as possible. They should not be reused due to the risk of cross-contamination. They are too fragile to be cleaned. The resources needed to make disposable gloves reusable would be even more wasteful. Story 24. Just about everything used in hospitals and clinics. Medical procedures generate a huge amount of plastic waste that cannot be recycled. Story 25. I think life-saving medication is one of those things where it probably does not work, though I still believe putting research and effort into making healthcare more sustainable should be a goal. However, there are also things that have no need to exist, such as fresh produce being individually wrapped in plastic. Story 26. Anything related to medical hygiene and sterility. I am sure some of it can be recycled, but it is a field I would not take lightly. Story 27. Well, things used to be made better and designed to last. I have t-shirts from the late 90s and t-shirts from the same company from last year. Guess which ones have holes in them? Story 28. Legacy code. I am referring to the common business-oriented language from the 1950s and 1960s that underpins the modern banking system. Story 29. Maybe this is one for explain like I am 5, but I don't understand why plastic is recycled into things that can be made out of renewable materials like pencils, park seats, etc. Surely plastic should be recycled into items that can only be made from plastic, to save using oil to make new plastic? Story 30. Depends on how many lives it is worth to you. I remember seeing an interesting analysis a few years ago that examined measures to encourage the reuse of plastic bags and linked it to a small increase in the number of people experiencing food poisoning, along with a very small number of deaths. Story 31. Things that should not exist. Bean bags, shatter-resistant plastic, glitter, Tetra Pak cartons, nitrous canisters, anything so poorly made that it is not fit for purpose. Story 32. Without the infrastructure to accommodate collecting the refuse and processing it, it will all end up in the landfill regardless of how it is manufactured. Story 33. I have always wondered why there is not a standardized wine bottle for all brands that you can take back to a store to be washed and reused. There could be one design each for red wine, white wine, and sparkling wine. The same concept could apply to jars. How much energy is used in recycling glass bottles? Story 34. Some things are consumable, and sometimes those things have to be commonplace and cannot be redesigned. There is really not much you can do to recycle a bad O-ring or a bald tire, but we are not getting rid of them anytime soon. Metal bushings wear down, and the material is ground into dust too fine to collect and reprocess. Sometimes it takes more money, time, and resources to fix something than to scrap it and replace it. Some specifications are mutually exclusive, and sometimes longevity or efficiency must take precedence over recycling or repair. There is no tool or artifact that does not have some impact or remnant. Story 35. Solar panels contain materials that are not environmentally friendly. These materials are safe when integrated within the solar panel and functioning properly. However, when the panels break, it becomes very difficult to dispose of them without harming the environment. Story 36. Single-use plastic cutlery should be banned immediately. It is used once and then thrown in the trash. The last time I ordered takeout, I received a plastic fork that broke while cutting a sandwich. It was unusable. Story 37. First thing that comes to mind is certain safety gear like safety glasses or protective suits, safety shields around blades, and similar equipment. Glass is not a substitute most of the time, and there is not much else that is adequately transparent. Story 38. Nothing really, considering that it is a lie anyway. There are so many plastic items that are labeled as recyclable when in fact we are lucky if 10% of that item can be salvaged. We should just ban plastic. Story 39. Most modern cars. Most modern appliances. Any modern technology where the manufacturer does not supply spare original equipment manufacturer parts. Most items made out of plastic. Any modern clothing made of poor quality material. Any cost-cutting measure that pushes expensive repairs down the line and adds a veneer of nice-looking features for an unknowing customer. Looking at you, modern United Kingdom homes. Any modern appliance that now requires an application to work, where there are multiple ways of implementing basic functionality without any applications or needing to create an account. Story 40. Phones should be moddable. It is possible and can even be done as thinly as phones are today. Today's phones are thick. I do not think moddable phones can be as thin as a Galaxy S10 or S10e, but I seem to be one of the few these days who want to go back to thin phones smaller than 6 inches. Every time I bring it up, I get multiple people complaining about battery life, even though thin phones, if done properly, are capable of good battery life. My Galaxy S10e with a big battery case feels more comfortable than my Samsung S25 with a clear case that still requires me to carry a battery separately, since I am a power user and do not just keep my phone in my pocket all day. There is no reason a phone cannot be as moddable as a desktop while being around the same size as current flagship models. Magnets make this possible. It is just a matter of cost and people getting used to spending more at the point of purchase but less over time, while doing research on what parts they want or need rather than having some company give them a very expensive one-size-fits-all approach that gets put in a drawer or thrown out every few years. If you are a power user, you could even save money by getting one decent but usable camera instead of 3 expensive, high-quality ones, for gigabytes of RAM instead of 12, and 128 gigabytes of storage, but add a microSD card they cannot keep from you anymore to upsell you on storage. Or maybe you do not need a camera or microSD, so you add a radio and TV antenna, a small projector, an infrared blaster, a premium speaker, or a case that gives you a seamless handheld experience. Or even nothing, and you just save money on the slots that would go to the camera. No camera, a small amount of lower quality RAM that is good enough to run a phone for someone who does not play heavy games or need every single app open at all times, minimum storage, and you have an affordable phone that costs a fraction of the cost of even a mid-range phone to upgrade every few years. You could donate or sell the old pieces instead of throwing them out. Story 41. Totally agree, except maybe not for parachutes or pacemakers. Some things we do not want refurbished. But yeah, glitter and $5 chargers? Bye. Story 42. Sanitary pads, tampons, disposable diapers. There might be some fetishes that make them desirable. Story 43. Medical supplies. Many items can be recycled, but we cannot eliminate the protections needed for single-use materials. Intravenous bags, intravenous tubing, syringes, and many plastic tools are single-use. Story 44. Honestly, cars. Besides a few classics, no one wants a 20-plus-year-old car, regardless of how cheap this or that repair is. The people who buy 20-year-old cars do so because they have no choice. Okay, I looked at my own cars, maybe make it 25-plus. Story 45. Medical supplies are the obvious exception here. My sister is a nurse, and while single-use items create waste, you absolutely cannot reuse or recycle things like syringes, intravenous bags, or surgical tools. Story 46. A naive take. Many products cannot be repaired because the cost to pay a skilled technician to repair them far exceeds the value of the item. Recycling is often a scam too. Recycling is a heavy-duty industry that produces pollution and toxic waste. In many cases, it is better for the environment to create a new item instead of trying to recycle the old one. When it comes to food or medical safety, disposable products are necessary to protect people from disease. It is unreasonable to increase the risk of food contamination or disease transmission because of an obsession with disposable products. Story 47. Zero waste mindset. The quote nails it. If something cannot be recycled or safely broken down, why mass produce it? This makes total sense for single-use plastics such as straws and packaging, or fast fashion made from cheap synthetic fiber. However, we cannot reuse a syringe or a pacemaker. Still, it is a solid rule of thumb for most of what ends up in the trash. Story 48. This totally makes sense for single-use plastics and inexpensive fast fashion. However, items like medical supplies cannot be composted, such as a pacemaker, nor can a syringe be reused. There is a limit to how far this can go. Story 49. Sorry, but if something can be reduced, does that not mean that it should be redesigned? If it can be reduced, there is too much of it. Why would that exempt it from the second half of the statement? Story 50. Everything is renewable if you pay enough money. Some things are more resourcefully produced from scratch. Story 51. Single-use plastic bags in developed countries with effective waste collection systems. In practice, attempts to phase them out result in more plastic, not less. For example, reusable bags contain 50 times as much plastic but are reused only 10 times until the owner forgets them and needs to buy another reusable bag. More recently, countries have banned thin plastic bags under 50 microns. So plastic bags are now thickened to 55 microns, even where 30 microns would have sufficed. Story 52. In my opinion, anything really. The idea should be to stop forceful packaging. For example, fruit does not need to be sold cut. Story 53. Almost everything is kept. The only things we throw out are those that cannot be reused. I keep everything because I have a touch of the hoarder in me. I see my neighbors on garbage day with all the bins and bags in the world, yet we struggle to fill one bin per week. I take the recycling into town every 3 months or so once I have enough to fill the truck. Most of the food thrown out is what the kids do not eat, along with parts of food containers that cannot be recycled in our bin. I compost food scraps that have not been cooked, as well as all our paper and non-laminated cardboard, which are used for that purpose too. We also grow everything we can. The worst part is that most people do not want to do the work. My wife sometimes forgets and puts some items we could have kept or sorted in the bin, but almost everything we take in is reused. Story 54. There are many medical devices that could be cleaned, sterilized, and reused. However, due to regulations, they are not. Story 55. I think a simpler rule should be that we pay for the full cost of everything we buy. Plastic should include the disposal costs. Oil products should include the spill costs. Coal should include the land refill costs. Meat should include the environmental impact cost. As it stands now, these costs are paid by future generations and taxpayer money. Story 56. Who is this quote from and what substances were they using when they said it? If I had to answer seriously, I would say criticism. Story 57. Spent nuclear fuel. You can potentially reduce it somewhat with breeder reactors. Reselling it? Let's agree not to sell it to terrorists for dirty bombs. Other than that, you are not reusing, repairing, rebuilding, refurbishing, recycling, or compositing it for a very long time. The word never is tough because no one knows what new processes will be invented to make it practical to recycle or otherwise effectively convert it back into its components. The main limitations now are that the cost of recycling something is too high to be worth it and/or the recycling process creates more byproducts and waste than it solves. Story 58. Bicycle and motorcycle helmets should never be reused once they have been involved in a crash or accident. They are designed for one-time use. After they save your life, you need to get a new one. Story 59. Single-use items for sanitary and cross-contamination prevention purposes probably will never fully be compostable. I am thinking of items like latex or nitrile gloves used in laboratories, certain types of swabs, or microbial plating loops. Wherever practical and possible, reusable versions are in use. However, for many items, you do not want to question whether they were sanitized properly before reuse. You should never compromise the safety of an item to prioritize whether it breaks down better as waste. For example, if disposable gloves can provide good barriers against chemical and biological agents and compost better, likely after being sterilized in an autoclave or incinerated for safety, then by all means use them. Autoclaving and incinerating consume a lot of energy, but it is important to prevent contaminants from entering the environment through waste disposal. The gloves should not pose a risk to anyone who needs them. In other cases, such as microbiology work, we often use alcohol dips followed by a quick pass through a Bunsen burner to sterilize metal picks, loops, forceps, scissors, and other tools. These methods work well, are reusable, and ensure sterilization. However, when working in a flow hood or safety cabinet, where airflow maintains negative pressure to prevent contamination, open flames are not allowed. Therefore, single-use plastic loops and similar items must be used to prevent cross-contamination during sample plating. Without this precaution, demonstrating the type and quantity of bacteria in samples would be unreliable. Ideally, we should reduce waste, especially plastic waste, whenever possible. But when it comes to safety and experimental integrity, these must not be compromised for environmental considerations. Environmental concerns are important, but changes should only be made when they do not worsen safety or data quality. Story 60. Things that cannot be reduced, reused, or recycled should be incinerated, in my opinion. It stops the waste going to landfill, although there will still be some residue, it will be much less. I dislike the idea of burying waste in the ground. We can make incineration relatively clean with scrubbers, and such plants can generate electricity from the process. Story 61. Lego is the best toy you can buy and a lifelong hobby for me. It is an overused expression, but the possibilities are endless when it comes to a system as well developed as Lego. The quality and engineering that go into each piece mean that every set offers usability far beyond what is shown on the box. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.